Welcome back, dear viewers, to the RPG Imaginarium, where here we seek to catalog the best traditional gaming stories the internet has to offer. Tonight we have a story requested by user TRJ-Try1, who commented on our reading of Let Me Tell You About Necromancy, for the tale of Squirky Jimbers, warrior, noble chicken farmer, arsonist, politician, murderer. As always, a link to the original story is provided below. When I GM, I tend to be pretty lenient about what the players can and cannot do. If a player wants to do something that will make the game more enjoyable for them, I am happy to sit down and see how I can make that happen. If there's no mechanic for it, but I can reasonably manufacture one, I will, provided it doesn't break the game. This is a story of my acquiescence perhaps getting a bit too far out of hand. I had a player, Player 1, who was a sort of package deal with another player, Player 2. The player that he was attached to was a valued member of the group, but for reasons that are best left unexplained, Player 2 needed Player 1 around so that she could play. So I explained the concepts of the game to Player 1 and helped him with character creation. He wound up having a human fighter named Squirky Jimbers. When I explained starting wealth and that he could spend it on things he liked, he announced suddenly, "I'd like a chicken farm." I was somewhat taken aback. A chicken farm? Yeah. He shoved over the book he was perusing. See? Chickens, 2 copper, so I can afford 300 chickens with my spare gold and sell the eggs. They can free range off half an acre, so they shouldn't need to be given feed. I told him to let me take some spreadsheets and to get back to him. Chickens were indeed listed at 2 copper apiece, but there was no price listed for an egg, so I clumsily took the price of eggs today versus the price of chickens today and compared them to the established prices of chickens in-game to conclude that 2 dozen eggs would be good for about a copper. 300 chickens lay 300 eggs a day, yielding around 12.5 coppers worth of eggs per day. That provided a return on investment of about 2.1%. I was fine with that. I added that he would need a servant to care for the chickens and sell the eggs, 1 copper per day, which further cut into his margins. He also had to kick back another gold to provide for the land and shelter for the chickens. He accepted these terms. His small chicken farm was going to be based in the small, about 100 residents made-up village of Vandal, which resided on the main river in my made-up world. This last part would turn out to be key to his plans. As the campaign went on, he made a little copper on the side, though I noticed he was taking less than the 11.5 copper per day he was allotted. I didn't really pay much mind to it. I assumed he was deducting expenses from it. That was until the 21st day had passed, at which point he informed me that his first clutch of eggs had hatched into chicks. He had been taking half income because half of the eggs laid were being set upon to hatch, while he ensured that it was never enough for a hen to be sitting on a dozen eggs, at which point she would stop laying according to the rules. All this time while the party was negotiating and clearing dungeons, engaging in all sorts of skullduggery in the campaign that I had spent months creating, he had been making sure his chicken farm was meticulously managed in his absence. He'd even specifically said multiple times while camping that he was writing instructions to his loyal farmhands for the upkeep of the chicken farm. But this was the first I had heard of these chicks. I opened my rulebook, and sure enough, black and white eggs can be eaten or sold or sat upon to be hatched into chicks after 21 days. These chicks would mature and begin to be laying in approximately 100 days. His investment had just gone from having an ROI of perhaps 1-point-something% to a considerably higher ROI. I quickly set upon nerfing. He would have to hire another laborer, an additional 1 per every 300 additional live chickens regardless of whether or not they were productive, so he'd have to hire a laborer for chicks. And what's more, he had to fork over another gold piece to build an expansion for his hen house and buy a bit more land from a neighbor. I also made a note that his chickens would have to die at an appropriate time. I created an Excel spreadsheet explicitly for tracking his chicken births and deaths. Truth be told, I was impressed, and well, I really do like spreadsheets. I believe that had quelled this farm uprising and we could refocus on the campaign. He even showed signs of being interested in the adventures at hand until, one day after killing a cultist, he was announced that he was leaving the party. Why, you might ask? Oh, only a temporary matter, but his farm had been far too long in his absence. He needed to go back, get the lay of the land, and see if there might be any business opportunities. And he was off on his horse. At this point, his chicken farm consisted of 2 separate buildings, a laying area and a hatchery nursery, and possessed 3,000 chickens as well as 11 laborers and an overseer, which I had made him hire to supervise the now extensive team of laborers to attend to them. He was making about 110 copper per day in profit, but had also amassed a decent sum of wealth from spelunking. After the session, I quickly threw together names and faces for him to meet in Vandal. His foreman was a named character, his neighbors, I even threw together a plot of the part of one of his neighbors who owned the forest surrounding his property and logged it. His neighbor was sick of the chickens as well as their smell and was trying to frame him to force him out of town. The idea was for him to use diplomacy and, for a change, and to prove to the town lawman that his neighbor was full of shit. He did use diplomacy, to convince his laborers and foremen to join him in a posse and murder the fuck out of his neighbors. I had not seen that coming. In fact, he was so convincing and lucky that his diplomacy role drew the attention of the gods. So convincing was he that the wives and sons of the laborers decided to make the bloodbath a family affair and join in on the fun. After all, they needed to make a living. And that is how a mob of 30 people assembled, barricaded his neighbor's family in their home, set the house on fire, and proceeded to burn the entire forest down in an event that was then successfully pinned on a forest fire, due to another excellent role by the Squirky and the accurate assessment that the vast majority of evidence would have been destroyed in the fire that claimed his neighbors' lives. And his laborers certainly were going to testify against themselves. And besides, how dare the local magistrates sling such vile accusations at a reputable, upstanding gentleman farmer, patriarch of Vandal, and his loyal employees who were guilty of nothing more than trying to put out a fire that had unfortunately claimed the lives of his beloved neighbors. But he didn't stop there, and his employees swore up and down that as his neighbor perished in the flames, his dying words were that his truest friend and attempted savior, Squirky Jimbers, should inherit his property. With a name like Squirky Jimbers, how could you not trust him? That did not fly. No, the neighbor's relative from the nearest city, Chaldea, would inherit. He would likely arrive within a week or so. Word had already been sent for him. Squirky Jimbers waited. Like a spider in a web surrounded by thousands and thousands of chickens, soon the heir arrived. He was devastated by the loss of his uncle and the property he had played on as a child. Squirky Jimbers assured him he had known his uncle well and that his uncle was a wonderful man. He was sure to use the phrase, "the candle that burns twice as bright," multiple times. Lovely. But a man from the town couldn't be tied down with a property that was now almost worthless. Squirky couldn't allow that, so he generously offered to take the land off of his hands for a princely sum of 50 gold coins. I figured what was the harm, the forest was burned down, he'll just put more chickens on the land. I allowed the heir to agree. He publicly signed over the land, accepted the money, and was on his way on a donkey that Squirky Jimbers had generously provided, as well as a bushel of hard-boiled eggs for the road. That set him back 8 gold pieces. However, the poison that Squirky Jimbers fed to the donkey beforehand had only cost a few silver. That night, Squirky, with the benefit of his horse, caught up to the heir on the road back to the city, stranded with a very dead donkey, and promptly murdered him, taking back the 50 gold pieces and eggs he had given him. Stabbed the donkey. Damn bandits. The local lord really should do a better job policing this road. Squirky was never one to let money go to waste, and those charred remains of a forest were much easier to clear now and make way for the barley and cows that Squirky was putting in. I hurriedly forced him to hire more laborers. This time more expensive ones, dairy workers, farmers. 2 more overseers, but using in-game prices and extrapolating the rest, he was still able to turn a profit fair and square. After he had established his new enterprises on his ill-gotten land, he hurriedly rejoined his party who had just finished clearing out a diabolus cult from a ruined palace. He apologized for the absence, but he brought them a bushel of day-old hard-boiled eggs. Lovely. This continued for another large chunk of the campaign. He was beginning to really get into his character. His actions in Vandal had really brought out the lawful evil in him, and he was really coming into his own. His barley, cows, and chickens multiplied until one day I informed him that his production had exceeded the markets that were within a few days' walk. He shrugged. Okay, I buy a boat then. And started scribbling on his character sheet. Excuse me? I buy a boat. A keelboat. 3,000 gold. It can't travel quickly, but the river is a more direct route to both nearby cities than the roads, and it can travel with the river at night when someone on the road would have to rest. Vandal already has a dock. Sure enough. That was all above board. You can buy a boat in Dungeons & Dragons. He hired multiple sailors and even a captain to staff his keelboat, employed by the Jimbers Produce Company, which he had named his enterprise the previous sessions, and christened the SS Flappy. He now had more than enough capacity to transport his growing produce to numerous cities. His company motto was, "With a name like Jimbers, you know you can trust us." He even entertained trying to go back to Vandal to be on the SS Flappy's maiden voyage to Chaldea. As it happened, the quest that the heroes were following led them to Candia. Someone with a name you can trust suggested that they hitch a ride on his keelboat from Vandal, which was not out of their way. This met with wholehearted agreement. I decided to have a little fun and put his enterprise in jeopardy. A local lord, a character which had already existed by the way, by the name of Walder Kernbrook, was going to attack Vandal. He didn't like chickens. Our heroes sprung into action and hurried at breakneck pace to Vandal. I realized a session before they'd arrived that Vandal would look completely different from the last time we saw it. The employees in the service of the Jimbers Produce Company now outnumbered the original citizens of Vandal. The town would have at least quadrupled in size, with Squirky Jimbers employing at least one of every 4 citizens. It was now a bustling river port. The sheer new scale of Vandal blew our party away, and me a bit. Word had already spread of Lord Kernbrook's attack. Citizens are scurrying about with no direction, some preparing a defense, some hunkering down, some fleeing by land or preferably by water. When Squirky Jimbers announces himself, they are relieved to see their presumed savior. The same Squirky Jimbers who organized a fire brigade to try and save his doomed neighbors. He and the party calmed them, assured that they could easily repel Lord Kernbrook's army if they band together. An emergency election is held at the insistence of a reputable local chicken farmer and his employees, and Squirky Jimbers is overwhelmingly elected mayor. Defenses begin to take shape. Barricades are assembled. Defensive strongpoints are concentrated around, you guessed it, the Jimbers Produce Company's farms. The JPC's keelboat is put on the river with the ballista and archers, both of which this town now has because it is quite large. There is no bridge across the river, but multiple places where it can be forded. Lord Kernbrook attacks one day early. Inspiring words from Mayor Jimbers combined with outflanking the Lord's forces with the use of the keelboat to land troops behind him lead inevitably to Kernbrook's defeat. He and his troops are caught in a bend in the river, however, and cannot flee except by going across the river. There's no ford there, though. Many of them drown. The rest are slowed enough that even the ridiculously slow keelboat can catch up to them, and with them have its archers gun them down in the water. It is a massacre. Lord Kernbrook falls to his knees before his mighty vanquisher, protector of the common man, Squirky Jimbers. Anything for his life. Squirky Jimbers demands a hand of his daughter in marriage, to which Kernbrook hastily agrees. Literally the second that Kernbrook takes Jimbers and his host back to his ancestral castle, Mayor Jimbers orders his followers to attack without mercy, and claims the castle and surrounding land as vandals. But mostly is. Lord Kernbrook is executed for a litany of crimes, the foremost of which was failing to properly patrol the countryside, and allowing the poor nephew of Jimbers' beloved neighbor to be murdered. Nice touch. Far from being bored with this turn of events, the rest of the party have completely forgotten about their previous quest and have gotten caught up in the story of Squirky Jimbers and helping him consolidate his temporal power. They receive titles and tracts of land to govern the farm from the benevolent Squirky Jimbers, who now styles himself Lord Mayor of Vandal and Kernbrook. I figure if the party's having fun, I should play along and not resist. So I humor them and force them to defend their claims in the local courts as well as the battlefield. As bad as I feel for abandoning all of my plots that I worked so hard on towards the end, they genuinely enjoyed themselves, and Squirky Jimbers, the Chicken Lord, went down in history as the greatest, if not the most honorable, feudal lord in the land.